Hello, and welcome all to Movie Hunter, the show that tracks down the quality of all sorts of movies. My name is Hunter, and today in the 15th episode, our target is The Amazing Spider-Man, produced by Columbia Pictures, Marvel Entertainment, Laura Ziskin Productions, Arad Productions, and Matt Tolmach Productions, and distributed by Sony Pictures Releasing. The Amazing Spider-Man was first worked on after the director of the Spider-Man trilogy, Sam Raimi, was unable to maintain good quality while keeping with Sony's scheduled release date, with it also being said that Raimi and the writers were having difficulty crafting a story that felt good and necessary. So, on January 11th, 2010, Columbia Pictures and Marvel Studios announced that they weren't going to continue the saga, but rather reboot it with a new cast and crew. The build-up to the film's release had an extremely expansive marketing campaign, including projecting a giant image of a Spider-Man logo on famous landmarks, including the Sydney Opera House and the Colosseum of Rome. A massive online scavenger hunt was also started, where rewards were given out and additional content was featured. T-shirts with The Amazing Spider-Man were also sold to support the charity Stand Up to Cancer, in which Andrew Garfield himself participated. Sony created a website, and Columbia Pictures talked with New York cultural institutions to create Spider-Man Week to support the cause. The inspiration for this came from the producer of the film, as well as Sam Raimi's trilogy, Laura Ziskin, who tragically passed away from cancer a year before the film's release. The film first released in Tokyo on June 13, 2012, and in the United States on July 3, 2012. The film was directed by Mark Webb, and the screenplay was by James Vanderbilt, who also wrote the story, Steve Kloves, and Alvin Sargent, with Sargent also working on the screenplay for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 and 3. It was produced by Laura Ziskin, Matt Tolmach, and Avi Arad, with Arad being a producer on Raimi's Spider-Man 2 and 3. The cinematography was by John Schwartzman, the editing was by Alan Edward Bell and Pietro Scalia, and the music was by James Horner. The cast includes Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Rhys Ifans, Dennis Leary, Martin Sheen, Sally Field, and Irfan Khan. The film earned $758.7 million on a budget of $200 to $230 million, becoming the seventh highest grossing film of 2012. The film was received fairly positively, but with the love of the previous trilogy, its positivity was somewhat surprising to me. The film was nominated for 20 awards, of which it won none of. The Amazing Spider-Man was the final film written by Alvin Sargent before his death in 2019, the final American film composed by James Horner before his death in 2015, and one of the final films produced by Laura Ziskin before her death in 2011. The film opens with a young Peter Parker who is dropped off at his Uncle Ben and Aunt May's by his parents, who quickly left their house after erasing some of their scientific research after finding that their home was broken into. The film jumps to Peter Parker as a teenager and attending high school, where he is often bullied and also gets a crush on Gwen Stacy, who has feelings for him too. When Peter discovers a briefcase owned by his father and discovers that he worked at Oscorp with someone named Dr. Kurt Connors, he enters Oscorp and snoops around, only to be bitten by a spider that gives him spider-like powers. Peter then visits Dr. Connors at his home, who reveals to him that he worked with his father and the two chat. Dr. Connors, missing his arm, studies cross-species genetics to try and give him the ability to regrow his arm, similar to reptiles. Peter gives him an algorithm that he found in his dad's briefcase, and Dr. Connors gets to work immediately. When Peter gets home, he and Uncle Ben get into a fight, because in Peter's meetings with Dr. Connors, to learn more about his father, he forgot to pick up Aunt May, who couldn't be picked up by Uncle Ben, because he had to switch shifts at work after Peter got into a fight at school. Peter storms off and Uncle Ben goes searching for him. At the store, Peter does nothing to stop a robber because the cashier was being snarky about Peter being short 2 cents on his purchase and denied him his item. The robber encounters Uncle Ben, though, who tries to stop him, but ends up dying in the process. This causes Peter to start tracking down criminals in search of his uncle's killer, creating a costume and designing web shooters. Gwen Stacy invites Peter over to her house for dinner, and Peter meets her father, George Stacy, the police captain, who dislikes Spider-Man because of his ruining of their plans. Peter tries to argue against this, saying that Spider-Man stands for the same thing that he does, but Captain Stacy combats this when suggesting that Spider-Man's motives seem more personal than for the good of the community. Meanwhile, Dr. Connors has successfully regrown the limb of a rat, and his superior demands that he begins human trials, though Connors insists that more time is needed. He is fired, and his superior takes the formula to be tested immediately. Desperate, Dr. Connors takes the formula himself, and later awakes to find his missing arm regrown, but the mutations continue and he becomes the Lizard, a giant talking reptile. Dr. Connors, as the Lizard, goes after his superior, who is on the Williamsburg Bridge, and crashes into nearby cars, causing mayhem. Peter leaves Gwen's house and chases after him. The Lizard continues knocking cars off the bridge, and Spider-Man has to abandon his pursuit of him to save a child in one of the cars. When he successfully saves him, the Lizard has fled, with Dr. Connors having escaped into the sewers, with the serum wearing off. Peter later attempts to track down the Lizard and take a photo of him for a check from the Daily Bugle, though things go awry and the Lizard learns Spider-Man's identity via a camera with Peter's name on it. Similarly, Peter learns the Lizard's identity via a lab rat that Dr. Connors had tested the formula on originally. The Lizard attacks Peter at his school, and Peter traces him back into the sewers, where he learns of Dr. Connors' plans to turn the entire city into lizard people and to erase the weakness he believes the humans have. Peter goes to stop him while Gwen goes to Oscorp to develop the antidote, but Captain Stacy stops Peter and almost arrests him, but Peter reveals his identity to him and tells him the danger that Gwen is in. Captain Stacy lets Peter go and orders his men not to fire at him, but not before one of them shoots Peter's leg. The construction worker who had his child saved by Spider-Man on the bridge orders his team to move cranes into position so that Peter can easily swing his way into Oscorp. Right as Peter is struggling to make his way, the cranes position themselves, and Peter easily makes his way to Oscorp to confront Dr. Connors. Gwen finishes the antidote, and Peter grabs it and fights the Lizard some more, but is able to get away from him when Captain Stacy shows up and distracts the Lizard so that Peter can get the antidote to the machine that will spread across New York City instead of the Lizard formula. The Lizard fatally wounds Captain Stacy, but Peter gets the antidote out and falls off the building, but Dr. Connors, in his human form, grabs Peter and saves him. Peter then goes to George Stacy, who makes him promise that he won't see Gwen anymore to keep her safe. Stacy dies, Connor is arrested, and Peter breaks up with Gwen, though implies at the end that he won't keep his promise to stay away from Gwen. Also, a post-credit scene shows Dr. Connors in prison talking with a man about Peter's father, with Connors insisting that Peter be left alone. Firstly, I'd like to discuss the background of this film a bit more, or rather, how the film handles this background. With the original and loved trilogy finishing just 5 years prior, this film had a very hard uphill battle in front of it. It had a lot of questions that it had to answer, with the two main ones being how it would differ from the original, and how it would still manage to tell a good Spider-Man story. And I'd like to answer those questions real quick. Firstly, how does it differ from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man? This is important as a reboot must really justify its existence by providing a reason for it to be needed or offering something new. I think this film does a really good job of this on the whole, with a few minor exceptions that I'll mention later, but ultimately things are very different. Andrew Garfield offers a very different Peter Parker than Tobey Maguire did. I think this Peter Parker offers a bit a much more reserved version that handles his stress well, but at the same time feels like it could all come crashing down at once, which it eventually does when Uncle Ben dies. The other Peter does a similar thing, but with this one, it has a very unique feeling to it that still instills the idea of who Peter is. Speaking of which, the second question, how does the film give a Spider-Man story? I similarly think that this is done really well too. We'll get into more specifics later, but ultimately, in learning slightly more about the comics in which he originated, this film offers a very different side of Spider-Man. I've been told by more comic-informed people that Peter is supposed to be this person who isn't a bully, but would be if he had the powers to. This film really delves into this idea by giving Peter's parents a more front spot on stage, and having Peter being a lot more affected by that due to the mystery around their disappearance. And then when Uncle Ben gets killed, it really drives Peter off the deep end and causes him to really become that bully that he kind of wanted to be because of what he's been through, and allows his lesson to feel really earned. But we'll get into specifics in a minute. I just wanted to quickly cover what this film does right as a reboot. Before we really delve into deeper characters and themes of the film, I'd like to take a moment to discuss this film's odd plot progression and some strange choices it makes to flow one scene to the next. In my Toy Story review, I claimed that one thing that helps make a classic movie a classic is having each scene flow naturally from one to another. By having the scenes flowing like this, it helps the movie deliver a compelling story. The reason I bring this up is that The Amazing Spider-Man ties scenes together with very strange decisions. The movie has a lot of plots that it starts but never finishes. Some are smaller, such as Peter trying to get a photo of the lizard for the Daily Bugle, or Dr. Connors as the lizard trying to stop his superior from giving out the formula to human subjects. These aren't major issues in the grand scheme of the movie, but they are odd as they seem to be there only to deliver information to a character or to force characters together. Why does Peter try to get photos for the Daily Bugle? It certainly isn't for the money or for a job, because it is never mentioned again. It only serves the purpose of giving Dr. Connors the information that Peter is Spider-Man. Why does Dr. Connors' superior rush with the human trials? It isn't to further his character, because he is never heard of or seen again after the lizard throws his car off the bridge and Peter saves him. It only serves the purpose of making Dr. Connors desperate and taking the formula himself, and then make him cause a conflict on the bridge, which forces Spider-Man and the lizard to meet for the first time. These things are strange because instead of finding a way to naturally have the characters learn things or do the things they do, the movie throws in random plot lines with no intention of finishing them. There are a few larger things too, such as Peter's parents and the mysterious Norman Osborn, who is apparently dying. I'm trying to give these things the benefit of the doubt right now, as they do seem to be setting up mysteries that will be resolved in the sequel. But right now, it seems like these elements are more just filler that only serves the purpose of giving the characters some motivation. One could argue that these elements don't matter that much, and I'd somewhat agree, as this doesn't affect my enjoyment of the film all that much, and not every scene is like this. But it does result in the movie having a very odd progression and feeling rough around the edges, as opposed to the feeling like it is a complete, flowing, and coherent story. Now that we've covered what is essentially this movie's framework, let's get into the actual contents of the film, and what better place to start than with the main character, Spider-Man. What I really like about this version of Peter Parker is that he really feels like Spider-Man. Not to say that the original trilogy didn't have a good connection between Peter and Spider-Man, but this film really shows Peter's growth into becoming Spider-Man in a really interesting way. And I think having his mask off in a lot more scenes of him being Spider-Man is a great visual that really digs into your mind that this is the exact same guy, and not some fake personality Peter is putting on. As mentioned previously, this film puts a strong emphasis on Peter's parents. Whereas the trilogy rarely mentions them and wanted you to not think about them, this film puts them front and center in your face. The trilogy barely mentions them, The trilogy barely mentioning them serves its story well and really gets across the great relationship Peter has with his aunt and uncle. But with the story this film is trying to tell, Peter's parents are a necessary tool for showing the way that Peter feels. Peter is hurt and he feels like he was done dirty by the world for taking his parents away when Uncle Ben dies and he gains the superhuman abilities to fully express how he feels, is when his morals are really put to the test. Peter fails this test, though, as when he first gets his powers, he uses it to get back at his bully and sees it as a way to undo to the world what the world has done unto him. His carelessness causes him to leave his aunt to dangerously traverse New York alone one night, and eventually leads to the death of Uncle Ben, when Peter leaves the house and Uncle Ben chases him after only to be shot by a robber who Peter lets get away. This causes Peter to spiral and go on a mad hunt for the robber, and he takes down anyone who vaguely matches the description. He also continues to work with Dr. Connors in the hopes that it will provide him with more information about his parents. This carelessness and dangerous endeavors cause him to disconnect from Aunt May and make her worry. When Peter is invited to Gwen's house, he talks with her father, the captain of the police force, and has a heated discussion about Spider-Man. Peter claims that Spider-Man stands for justice the same as him, but Captain Stacy retorts by stating that he is only thinking of himself and cares not for the safety of New York, but for his own self-interest. He then follows this up by describing how Spider-Man took down a guy who the police were tracking for the last 6 months, who was going to lead them to a large group of criminals, but that chance is now gone, with the 6 months being a waste. This is about halfway through the movie, and this conversation leads to Peter doing things for the good of the people now. This conversation leads straight into the battle between Spider-Man and the Lizard at the bridge, and it is pretty cool. Obviously, the best part is when Peter abandons his pursuit of the Lizard to save a child who is stuck in a car that's dangling off the bridge. The scene is really well done, and if you've seen it, you probably already know why. After this, Peter abandons his pursuit of the man who killed Uncle Ben, and instead invests his time into stopping the Lizard, especially after realizing that Dr. Connors is the Lizard, and that Peter giving him the algorithm for the formula made it all happen, and he is partly responsible. When his final battle comes along, he goes to stop the Lizard, not for personal gain or for revenge against the world, but because it is the right thing to do, and it is his responsibility. By doing this, George Stacy sees that he is finally trying to help, and after Peter shows him his identity, he lets him go stop the Lizard, and later helps him out, even though it cost him his life. He requests that Peter stays away from Gwen to keep her safe, and Peter agrees before he dies, and Peter stays away from Gwen. Though eventually, Gwen confronts Peter and asks him if her father made him stay away from her, to which he tells the truth. The strange thing, though, about this ending is that it implies that Peter may not keep his promise to Captain Stacy and continue to be with Gwen anyways. I find this to be a very odd note to leave on, for obvious reasons. Overall, I think that Peter's arc in the film is great and is unique from the trilogy. Like I mentioned before, though also as mentioned earlier, the plot is rough around the edges and has an unnatural flow to it. This, combined with the odd ending, makes for not quite as good a story as in the first Spider-Man film of the Raimi trilogy, but it is still a really good, if not a bit odd at times, story. Next, I suppose we should talk about the villain of the film, Dr. Connors, aka the Lizard. While I think I prefer Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, and Sandman in their respective films, the Lizard is by no means a bad villain. Mainly, most bad parts of his character are a result of the strange pacing of the film and its somewhat similarity to Spider-Man 3, with its numerous things it attempts to tackle, though to a much lesser degree, rather than any bad parts in his writing. Dr. Connors is interesting as he serves a few different purposes. He is Peter's clue to information about his parents, he serves as somewhat of a teacher for Peter, and of course he is the villain of the film when he becomes the Lizard, which is what I will focus most on here, as it is easily the most important and prominent. Dr. Connors serves as a nice contrast to Peter because, similar to Peter, Dr. Connors feels injustice towards the world. as he is missing his arm, which obviously makes life difficult. As such, he desperately seeks a way to regrow his arm, and when Peter arrives at his doorstep with the key to his work, his hopes are reignited, and he begins rapid advances in his research. When his work is threatened to be rushed and he is fired from his project, he uses it on himself and becomes the lizard, a creature that not only restores his arm, but provides him with great strength and agility. This ability makes him go partially crazy when it wears off and his arm disappears again. In the final battle, his plan becomes to turn the entire city into lizard people. This is where his story really starts to lose the plot for me. His plans really become somewhat nonsensical. Like, on a base level, it makes sense. He wants to remain a lizard person, and the best way to be accepted as a lizard person is to make everyone a lizard person. The problem is that at this point, the formula is only temporary, and only the city would become lizard people, not the world. Besides the flaws and randomness of his plan, it does serve as a plot for Spider-Man to foil, and I do like what happens with Dr. Connors after the fact. When he is back in his human form, he saves Peter from falling off the building, and as his arm vanishes, he quickly grabs him with his remaining arm and pulls him up. A nice bit of redemption before he is promptly arrested for his numerous crimes. While the story does lose the plot a little in the end, I still really like the lizard as a villain of the film. He is more human than in usual lizard adaptations, and while I could see this getting the thumbs down from comic fans, though I could be mistaken, I think it really aids the story being told and is a really cool design. I wish his contrast to Peter was utilized more in the film, but in the end, he is far from a bad villain, and he does a really good job, even if I don't think he is quite as good as the original trilogy's villain, though again, that is really due to the fact that the film tries to tackle a lot. Speaking of which, now that we've discussed the two main characters of the film, I'd like to quickly review the other important characters of the film at one time. This being Gwen Stacy, George Stacy, Uncle Ben, and Aunt May. First, Gwen Stacy serves as a nice companion to Peter. I don't think that she provides the same amount of fun stuff to analyze as Mary Jane did in the first of the Raimi trilogy, but she has her own strengths that outdo Mary Jane. The thing I liked so much about Mary Jane in the first film is that her and Peter's meetings provided context as to what the audience missed during the time skip, and gave her and Peter nice scenes where they catch up with one another. With Peter staying in high school throughout the entire duration of this film, though, Gwen Stacy is mostly used as a love interest. Now, I'm not a fan of romance stories, so I don't really have a whole lot to say about this. However, I do want to note that I think her role in the finale is a really nice role for her to play. She plays a pivotal role in defeating the lizard, and isn't just used by the villain to lure Peter out. In the end, I don't really have much to say on Gwen Stacy. She serves her purpose well and has a nice role in the end, but I personally just really don't have much to analyze here. I will say once more that the ending where Peter implies that he is still going to be with her despite her father's dying wish is a really weird ending, especially compared to the ending of the first Spider-Man trilogy. Now, George Stacy, he has a lot more for me to discuss, though I'll keep it brief as I already went a good deal into it in Peter's analysis. Captain Stacy originally seems as though he is going to be an obstacle for Peter to work around, being the captain of the police force with a vendetta against Spider-Man, and on top of that being the father of Gwen, it seems like a recipe for disaster for Peter. However, I was very surprised to see that this wasn't the direction taken. Instead, George Stacy serves as a teaching moment for Peter. He is the one who is finally able to get across to Peter and makes him realize that he isn't stopping criminals for the greater good, but only to get the vengeance he seeks. What I really like about this moment is that he doesn't even realize that he is talking to Spider-Man right now. He is only talking to Peter. Then, later in the final battle, he lets Spider-Man go after he learns that it's Peter, and he sees that Spider-Man really is fighting crime for the good of the people now, including his daughter. Plus, his sacrifice is extremely cool. with him distracting the lizard for Peter by shooting away at him with his shotgun. Definitely a favorite character of mine, who I wish got more screen time, but what we do have is nice. Next is Uncle Ben. I really like that he differs from the other Uncle Ben, as he is a lot more flawed, but still holds his most important character trait. This version of Uncle Ben fills the role really well of trying to get Peter to understand responsibility, even if Peter doesn't listen to him. I've seen a lot of people joke about the scene where Uncle Ben essentially says, "With great power comes great responsibility," but in a much longer and different way as to avoid sounding similar to the Raimi trilogy. But personally, I think this speech works just as well, especially the final line where he says, that's what is at stake here. Not choice, responsibility. Overall, I really like this version of Uncle Ben. It's not the most traditional version, but I like this more flawed, trying to do the best with what he's got idea. He's even got a few funny moments, and though he obviously doesn't have much time in the film, as he has to die pretty early on, I think he does well with what time he has. Finally, Aunt May. I feel like the only thing I really have to talk about with Aunt May is that while she isn't bad, she just doesn't really have that much screen time. While it's probably only slightly less time than in Spider-Man 1, that Aunt May had a very solid connection with the other characters, and in the second film, her character was able to expand on top of that. This Aunt May lacks moments with any characters outside of Peter, and even then, the connection is that they don't have a connection. Peter is struggling because of Uncle Ben's death, and so is Aunt May, but due to Peter's current attitude, he doesn't communicate to Aunt May at all. My only issue here is that after Peter has his conversation with George Stacy, and his motivation and attitude changes, he doesn't have a scene where he finally talks with Aunt May. It's kind of another example of an abandoned storyline. There is a somewhat nice moment, though, at the end, after the battle, where Peter returns home and just hugs Aunt May. I would have liked to get a bit more out of it. Overall, this is far from a bad Aunt May. She just lacks a strong presence. Overall, I'd give The Amazing Spider-Man an 8 out of 10. I'll be honest and say I was very surprised with it. Despite its uphill battle, the film really took charge and was able to deliver a unique experience that still felt like a Spider-Man film. With its changes, both large and small, it really helped separate it from the trilogy and gave a fun experience. With that said, it does have a few things holding it back from reaching the highs of Spider-Man 1 and 2, but it is still a fun time and I'd recommend it if you haven't already seen it. It can definitely drag from time to time, but it has a lot to call its own as well. Well, that's all, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and feel free to share any opinions you had on the movie. A new episode releases each week, so stay tuned to see which film I cover next. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.